In 1975, the American Motors Corporation unveiled a vehicle that would become one of the most polarizing automobiles in American automotive history. This was the AMC Pacer, a car that was wider than it was long, featured asymmetric doors, and was designed around an engine it would never receive. And one of the things that makes the Pacer so fascinating is not just its spectacular failure in the marketplace, but how it eventually became a cult icon, thanks to a comedy film nearly 2 decades after its demise. The Pacer was produced from 1975 through 1980, a relatively short production run that tells you everything you need to know about how the market received this audacious design experiment. But before we dive into why this car failed so spectacularly, we need to understand what AMC was trying to accomplish and how everything went so terribly wrong. Now, when we look at the context of the early 1970s, America was experiencing its first major oil crisis. The OPEC oil embargo of 1973 and 74 had sent shockwaves through the American automotive industry. Gas lines stretched for blocks. Americans were suddenly questioning their love affair with massive, fuel-guzzling land yachts. The big 3 automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, were scrambling to develop smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles. But it was American Motors Corporation, the smallest of the major American automakers, that decided to take the boldest gamble. AMC's designers, led by the legendary Richard Teague, had a vision for what they called Project Amigo. This wasn't going to be just another small car. This was going to revolutionize the entire concept of urban transportation. They threw out every conventional wisdom about automotive design. While other cars prioritized length, the Pacer would prioritize width. While other cars had minimal glass area, the Pacer would be surrounded by windows. While other cars had symmetrical doors, the Pacer would have doors of different lengths. And when we examine the Pacer's proportions, you can immediately see how radical this design was. The car measured 77 inches wide. That's wider than a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow of the same era. But it was only 171 inches long. To put that in perspective, it was nearly as wide as it was long. This gave the Pacer proportions unlike anything else on American roads. It looked compressed, stubby, almost as if someone had taken a normal car and pushed it together like an accordion. But the most visually striking feature of the Pacer wasn't its width or its stubby proportions, it was the glass. Enormous, expansive glass surfaces that gave the car its infamous nickname, the fishbowl on wheels. The Pacer had approximately 5,615 square inches of glass. That's 37% more glass area than the average car of its time. The greenhouse, as designers call the glass area of a car, was absolutely enormous. It wrapped around the occupants, providing visibility that was, frankly, unmatched by any other American car of the era. Now, as we turn our attention to one of the Pacer's most controversial design features, we encounter the asymmetric doors. The passenger door on the Pacer was 4 inches longer than the driver's door. 4 full inches. This wasn't a manufacturing defect or a cost-cutting measure. This was intentional design, and AMC's engineers had what they thought was sound reasoning behind it. The logic went like this. In countries that drive on the right side of the road, passengers enter and exit from the curbside, which is the right side of the vehicle. By making the passenger door longer, you would make it significantly easier for rear seat passengers to get in and out of the car. Parents could more easily load children into the back seat. Elderly passengers would have an easier time maneuvering. It was thoughtful. It was considerate. It was also deeply, profoundly strange to look at. When you parked a Pacer on the street and walked around it, something just looked wrong. The human eye expects symmetry in automotive design. Cars are supposed to look the same on both sides. They're supposed to be mirror images. The Pacer's asymmetric doors violated this fundamental principle of automotive aesthetics. The passenger door, being 4 inches longer, meant that the rear edge of the door sat in a different position relative to the rear wheel arch than the driver's side door. It made the car look like it had been assembled incorrectly, like someone at the factory had installed the wrong door by mistake. The passenger door, being longer and containing more glass, weighed approximately 87 pounds. The driver's door weighed approximately 73 pounds. Both were heavier than contemporary full-size car doors. AMC engineers had to design massive forged steel door hinges that could support 150 pounds without sagging. They tested these hinges to 500,000 opening and closing cycles, designing them for what they claimed was a 100-year lifespan. The engineering that went into making these asymmetric doors work properly was, frankly, remarkable. But it didn't change the fact that they looked odd. Now, here's where the Pacer's story takes its most dramatic turn. Everything about this car, its wide body, its proportions, its entire engineering layout, had been designed around an engine it was never going to receive. AMC had made a spectacular bet on the future of automotive power plants, and that bet was the Wankel rotary engine. The Wankel rotary was revolutionary. Instead of pistons pumping up and down in cylinders, the Wankel used a triangular rotor spinning inside an oval-shaped chamber. This design promised several advantages. First, it was incredibly compact. A Wankel engine producing the same power as a conventional piston engine could be half the size and significantly lighter. Second, it was smooth. Without the reciprocating motion of pistons, a rotary engine could spin to high RPMs with turbine-like smoothness. Third, it was simple, with far fewer moving parts than a conventional engine. In 1973, AMC signed a licensing agreement with Curtiss-Wright to build Wankel engines for cars and Jeep-type vehicles. This was going to be AMC's technological leap forward, the innovation that would allow them to compete with the Big Three. The Pacer had been designed from the ground up to accommodate this lightweight, compact power plant. The wide body would house the rotary engine comfortably. The weight distribution would be perfect. The car would be nimble and fuel efficient, exactly what American consumers needed in the post-oil crisis world. But AMC didn't have the resources to develop the Wankel engine themselves, so they made a deal with General Motors, who were also developing rotary engines for their own vehicles. GM had invested approximately $50 million, that's $385 million in today's money, into their rotary engine program. They were committed. Or so AMC thought. In September of 1974, just months before the Pacer was scheduled to launch, General Motors made a decision that would doom the Pacer before it even reached showrooms. They canceled the Wankel rotary engine program completely. No more development, no more production. The reasons were numerous and, from GM's perspective, entirely justified. First, there were durability issues. The rotary engine's apex seals, the components that sealed the edges of the triangular rotor against the chamber walls, were wearing out prematurely. Second, despite being designed during the oil crisis, the Wankel actually had terrible fuel economy. The combustion chamber shape led to incomplete fuel burning, which meant the engine consumed more fuel than comparable piston engines. Third, the upcoming emissions legislation in the late 1970s would be difficult for the rotary to meet given its combustion characteristics. And fourth, GM realized that Americans, accustomed to low-revving, high-torque V8 engines, wouldn't appreciate the high-revving, peaky power delivery of the rotary. AMC was left holding the bag. Actually, they were left holding something worse than a bag. They were left holding a nearly complete automobile designed entirely around an engine that no longer existed. Production tooling had been ordered. Assembly lines were being prepared. Dealers were expecting inventory. The marketing campaign was ready to launch. They had invested millions of dollars they couldn't afford to lose. AMC needed a solution, and they needed it immediately. The solution they came up with was, essentially, to take whatever engine they had lying around and shoehorn it into the Pacer's engine bay. That engine was AMC's inline six-cylinder, a power plant that had been designed for much larger, heavier vehicles. It was not compact. It was not lightweight. It was not fuel efficient. It was everything the Pacer wasn't supposed to be. The inline 6-cylinder engine weighed hundreds of pounds more than the intended Wankel rotary. This completely upset the Pacer's weight distribution, making it heavily nose-heavy. The car's suspension, designed for a lighter engine, now had to cope with significantly more weight over the front wheels. The handling suffered. The car dove under braking. It pushed in corners. It felt front-heavy because, well, it was front-heavy. But worse than the handling was the fuel economy. The Pacer, this car that was supposed to be AMC's answer to the oil crisis, now returned just 15 to 18 miles per gallon in city driving. That was barely better than full-size sedans that offered far more interior room, far more prestige, and far more comfort. The entire premise of the Pacer had been compromised. It was supposed to be a small, efficient urban vehicle. Instead, it was a small, inefficient oddity. And here's a fascinating detail. AMC had actually purchased several pre-production rotary engines from GM for testing before the project was canceled. A handful of Pacers actually did receive Wankel engines during the development phase. These prototypes reportedly ran smoothly and delivered the performance AMC had promised. But they were just prototypes. The production Pacer would never see a rotary engine. Now, when the Pacer finally launched in February of 1975, AMC's marketing machine went into overdrive. The advertising campaign emphasized the car's spacious interior, its futuristic styling, its innovative features. Television commercials showed the enormous greenhouse flooding the interior with light. Magazine advertisements highlighted the easy rear seat access provided by the longer passenger door. AMC positioned the Pacer as the first wide, small car, a vehicle that provided the interior space of a much larger car in a more efficient package. And initially, it worked. Curious buyers flocked to AMC dealerships to see this unusual vehicle for themselves. Some were charmed by the unconventional design. Others appreciated the roomy interior and excellent visibility. In its first year, AMC sold approximately 145,000 Pacers. These were impressive numbers for a small automaker like AMC. For a brief moment, it seemed like the gamble might actually pay off. But the honeymoon didn't last long. As Pacers hit the streets and owners began actually living with these cars day to day, problems emerged. Word of mouth turned sour. The fuel economy that was supposed to be a selling point was actually worse than advertised. The enormous glass area that provided such excellent visibility also turned the interior into a greenhouse in summer and an icebox in winter. The air conditioning system struggled to cool all that glass area. The heating system worked overtime in cold weather. Owners reported that the Pacer's climate control was in a constant losing battle against physics. The build quality, always a concern with AMC's limited resources, was inconsistent. Body panels didn't always align properly. The asymmetric doors, already odd-looking when properly adjusted, developed a tendency to sag differently from each other as the cars aged. Interior plastics cracked and faded in the intense sunlight that came through all that glass. The wide body that was supposed to make the interior so spacious actually made the car difficult to park and maneuver in tight urban spaces, negating much of its supposed advantage as a city car. And when we turn our attention to how the automotive press responded, we see the Pacer's reputation crumbling in real time. Initial reviews had been curious and generally positive, praising AMC's boldness and innovation. But as journalists spent more time with the car, the reviews became more critical. Consumer Reports couldn't recommend the Pacer. Road and Track noted the handling deficiencies caused by the front-heavy weight distribution. Car and Driver mocked the styling, calling it everything from a glass bubble to a rolling greenhouse. By 1977, just 2 years after launch, Pacer sales had collapsed to approximately 58,000 units. That's a 60% drop in just 2 years. AMC tried desperately to revive interest. In 1977, they introduced a station wagon variant with even more glass area. In 1978, they offered a V8 engine option, which made the already poor fuel economy even worse and exacerbated the front-heavy weight distribution. They tweaked the styling, adding wood grain trim and more luxurious interior options in an attempt to make the car seem more upscale. Nothing worked. The Pacer had become a punchline. Late-night television comedians joked about its appearance. Newspaper cartoonists caricatured its bulbous proportions. The car that was supposed to save AMC had become a symbol of the company's desperation and misjudgment. Sales continued to decline. By 1979, AMC sold just 10,500 Pacers. By 1980, the final year of production, they sold just 1,716 units. In total, from 1975 through 1980, AMC produced approximately 279,998 Pacers. For context, Ford sold over 2 million Mustangs in just the Mustang's first 2 years of production. The Pacer was a commercial disaster. It cost AMC dearly, both financially and reputationally. The company never recovered from the losses. Within a few years, Chrysler would acquire AMC's assets, primarily because they wanted the profitable Jeep brand. The Pacer was forgotten, relegated to the automotive dustbin alongside other notorious failures like the Ford Edsel and the Pontiac Aztek. Now we come to one of the most unexpected twists in automotive history. In 1992, 12 years after the last Pacer rolled off the assembly line, something remarkable happened. A comedy film based on a Saturday Night Live sketch was released. The film was called Wayne's World, and it featured two slacker friends who hosted a public access television show from a basement in Aurora, Illinois. And what did these characters drive? A baby blue AMC Pacer with flames painted on the sides. Wayne's World became a cultural phenomenon. The film grossed over $183 million worldwide. It spawned catchphrases that entered the American lexicon. Schwing. We're not worthy. Party on. And most famously, it featured a scene where Wayne, Garth, and their friends lip-synced to Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody while cruising in that blue Pacer. That scene, lasting just over 2 minutes of screen time, did something AMC's entire marketing department had never managed to accomplish. It made the Pacer cool. Or rather, it made the Pacer ironically cool, which in the 1990s was just as valuable as being actually cool. The scene was so popular that it sent Bohemian Rhapsody back to number 2 on the American charts, 20 years after its original release. And the Pacer, that fishbowl on wheels that had been such a commercial failure, suddenly became one of the most recognizable movie cars in cinema history. The Wayne's World Pacer appeared in the film's sequel in 1993. Hot Wheels produced die-cast models. Poster companies sold prints featuring the car. The Pacer had achieved something that AMC, despite spending millions on marketing, had never managed: cultural immortality. Not as a successful car, but as an icon of quirky, ironic coolness. And today, when we look at the Pacer's legacy, we see a vehicle that occupies a unique space in automotive history. It's collected by enthusiasts who appreciate automotive oddities. Wayne's World replicas, painted baby blue with flames, command significant premiums over standard Pacers. Original low-mileage examples are preserved by devoted fans. Car shows always draw crowds around a Pacer because people want to see this legendary failure in person. The Pacer has appeared in numerous other films and television shows over the years, always playing the same role: the visual shorthand for quirky character or desperate circumstances. It's become a cultural reference point, instantly recognizable even to people who weren't alive when it was in production. You can mention the fishbowl car or the car from Wayne's World, and most people immediately know you're talking about the AMC Pacer. So what can we learn from the Pacer's story? It's a cautionary tale about depending on technology you don't control. AMC bet everything on General Motors delivering those Wankel rotary engines. When GM pulled the plug, AMC should have delayed the project or fundamentally redesigned the car. Instead, they pushed forward with a compromised product, and it cost them dearly. But it's also a story about innovation and taking risks. Richard Teague and his design team dared to imagine something radically different. They challenged every convention about what a small car should look like. They prioritized interior space and visibility over traditional aesthetics. They implemented asymmetric doors, an idea that was genuinely innovative even if it looked strange. Their vision was bold, even if the execution was fatally flawed. And in an era when most cars looked fundamentally similar, the Pacer stood out. It was memorable. It generated strong reactions. It started conversations. These aren't qualities that most automotive designers can claim for their work, even when that work is technically superior and commercially successful. The AMC Pacer reminds us that failure can be more interesting than success. Successful cars fade into the background of history. They're competent, reliable, and ultimately forgettable. Failed cars like the Pacer stick in our cultural memory precisely because they're so unusual. They become case studies in engineering schools. They become cautionary tales in business schools. And ultimately, if they're strange enough and fail spectacularly enough, they become cult classics. In the end, the fishbowl on wheels, with its asymmetric doors and its stubby, wide proportions, has outlived the company that built it. It's outlived most of the cars that outsold it. It's achieved a kind of immortality that commercial success alone could never provide. Was it a good car? No. By almost any objective measure, the Pacer was a poorly executed vehicle built on compromised engineering. But was it an important car? Absolutely. It represented ambition. It represented innovation. It represented an American automaker taking a massive risk in a desperate attempt to survive. And thanks to Wayne Campbell and Garth Algar lip-syncing to Bohemian Rhapsody in that baby blue Pacer, this failed experiment from 1975 became exactly what it set out to be. Unforgettable. Just not in the way American Motors Corporation ever intended. So what do you think about the AMC Pacer? Was it ahead of its time? Or was it simply misguided from the start? Could it have succeeded if it had received its intended Wankel rotary engine? Leave a comment in the comments section and let me know.